Where's your reading? Where's your research where you're trying to figure something out?
Tom, I could give you two answers. I could give you a very long list of international things that worries me. You mentioned Afghanistan. There's always China. People aren't talking about North Korea, but it hasn't gone away. There's Iran. But. The thing that worries me most is still us. What still worries me most is how divided this country is, how our democracy is under assault from within. And that's what worries me. If we can't come together as a country, there's no way we will be able to act effectively on the world stage.
You drove forward this discussion, it seems a lifetime ago, a world in disarray. So let's look at, after this 4th of July, an America in disarray. What do our institutions need to do to get us back on course in a better direction?
Well, our institutions, some of them have performed pretty well when you think about it. The courts have performed admirably. The media, for the most part, has fulfilled its role. The real problem, I think, is two things. One is Washington. We're still unable, for the most part, to come together to deal with some of the challenges facing this country, even beyond infrastructure, things like immigration reform, dealing with budget issues, and so forth. And then at the state level, the disparity in state levels of vaccination is a real statement, shall we say, about the federal system and the unevenness of how the United States is dealing with what is still the biggest challenge the country faces.
Why can't we get more of a bipartisan push behind infrastructure? I mean, I know we have the $700 billion deal right now, but in an age of, trillion-dollar stimulus and a country full of patriotic politicians, why don't we get a bipartisan deal to give us an edge on our competition?
Well, we may have a bipartisan deal. I think central to it will be a narrow definition of what constitutes infrastructure. If there's no bipartisan support for, shall we call it, a broad definition of quote unquote human infrastructure, and then I think there's still questions of whatever scale legislation is passed is how you pay for it, and you're obviously going to have problems when it comes to specific tax increases.
Is there ever a possibility that we get someone or a group, a big enough group that wants to clean out the loopholes, clean out the deductions, and bring revenue higher with the tax base where it is?
Ever's a long time, but I don't see it. One of the rules of democracy, it's not what majorities care about. What drives a democracy are intense minorities. That's the reason, for example, you might have 90% of the country favoring background checks, but you can't get certain things on gun control because of the intensity of minority. And by and large, you have very intense minorities in favor of quote unquote loopholes. And I think it makes it very hard, even though a majority of the country might be open to the sort of thing you're talking about.
Yeah, Dr. Haass, I mean, we talk about the disarray here in the U.S., and of course, a lot of foreign nations look at that disarray and they see opportunity. We're continue to be barraged by cyber attacks, presumably either at the direction or at least with the sort of implicit, backing of foreign governments here. You have the resurgence here of China across the world in areas where the U.S. used to be the dominant force here. How much does the White House and the policymakers here in the U.S. need to be concerned here about the influence or the lack of influence we may now have in some parts of the world?
I think you got two areas. One is with actual or would-be foes. The other is with allies. I think they've been more focused on trying to rebuild U.S. relations with our friends to reduce some of the uncertainty, some of the concerns there. But with the two countries you mentioned, the administration has been focused much more on China than on any other foreign policy issue. They haven't quite put together a comprehensive or coherent policy. With Russia, we're going to have a test. You had the meeting in Geneva. The president put down a marker about cyber. Russia continues to allow cyber operations against us that emanate from its territory. So the real question is, are we going to act on the norm that, like in the case of terrorism, governments are held accountable for terrorist actions that come from their territory? Are we going to act on the norm that governments are also going to be held accountable from cyber actions that emanate from their territory? We're going to find out.
Do you have confidence that there'll be a diplomatic solution to this?
No. I may be a diplomat by training. I don't have a lot. Look, you're not going to get some Geneva Convention on how to regulate cyberspace. The real question is whether you can influence, say, the cost-benefit assessment of a Vladimir Putin. And that's the real issue.
Ambassador Haass, a totally unfair question, but let's go there. It's Unfair Tuesday. Is there a Biden doctrine? His Secretary of State Blinken is a president. Have they delineated a distinction here that you see that you can call a Biden doctrine?
No, I don't see a doctrine because a doctrine has a degree of commonality and universality to it, Tom. What I'm seeing are certain impulses. A real one I mentioned already, which is an emphasis on rebuilding relations with allies. Two, a surprising emphasis on the promotion of democracy, the idea of dividing the world between democracies and authoritarian systems. Obviously, a fairly robust rhetorical and other set of responses towards China. There's been a re-entry into multilateral organizations. But again, these are all tendencies. I don't see anything that both explains what's going on and predicts what will go on.
What is so helpful here to have the gentleman of the Council on Foreign Relations with us is there can always be a headline that comes out that deserves perspective from Richard Haass. Here's a headline, Ambassador. China-U.S. officials have phone call on Korean Peninsula issue. You led with this in our conversation this morning. Have we been tested yet on Biden and North Korea, or does that await?
It awaits. It hasn't happened, and there's been no what you call station identification from North Korea, which historically we've gotten from time to time. There's been some intriguing reports about real problems with COVID inside North Korea, so one has the sense from afar that they've got their hands full. But in the meantime, North Korea's nuclear capabilities and missile capabilities have steadily built up over the last decades. And I think the real question is, does the Biden administration try to start some type of what you might call an arms control conversation, saying, look, we want to get rid of all your nuclear weapons and missiles. We know that's not going to happen anytime soon. Let's see if we can't slice this in a way or tranche this in a way where you get we get a bit of progress on what we want, and in exchange, you get a bit of progress on what you want, which is sanctions relief. We haven't seen that yet, Tom, but I think that's possible.
Ambassador, I want to ask about Berlin. I'm here, and of course, the elections are coming up in September. Do any of the possible outcomes change the relationship between the West and Vladimir Putin? Because until now, we've been really unable to strike back at Russia, or at least if we do strike back, we're still sending billions of euros through Nord Stream 2 pretty soon, straight to Moscow and straight to Putin's coffers.
I think Nord Stream has gone so far that it's hard for me to imagine anyone walking it completely back. No, I think the United States is going to have differences with pretty much whatever leadership emerges ultimately in Germany over both China and Russia. And in both cases, the German desire to have an economically led diplomacy or foreign policy will probably outpace us. And I think that's going to be an inevitable area of some friction. Ironically enough, it might be less between the U.S. and the Greens because there the Biden administration might find more of an overlap stemming from both environmental issues and human rights issues.